everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Eric Byrne. I'm your new superintendent. And I'd like to just start before we get to the program and the questions that were submitted, and we'll also open up to questions, just a little bit about why we're doing this. One of the things I heard loud and clear over the summer when meeting with folks, from the Board of Education to parents to teachers, administrative colleagues, town officials, is communication was something that was in need of a lot of work. It's something in my career I've always worked really hard at, and tonight is one of those examples. Now, I have never done a fireside chat before, so this is new, but being available, being accessible, getting to know folks in the community, and being in the schools and at events, that's kind of what I do. That's what a superintendent should do, in my estimation. And that's the way I get to know the community and best support the community. So I appreciate you coming out tonight and joining us. And as I said, we've got a bunch of questions that were submitted. I've got some notes for myself because I can't remember everything at my age, and being retired and all that, or at least I used to be retired. And I think Laura's probably going to wing it a little bit. But so just so you know who this is next to me, if you don't know the story of how I ended up here, I'll share that briefly. So I've been a member of the Orange Theory Fitness Gym on the Post Road since it opened in 2019. And I like Orange Theory because you just go, it's a class, somebody tells you what to do, and it's the one time in my week that I don't have to make any decisions. I just have to try and stay on the treadmill and not fall off and embarrass myself. So I've been going to that Orange Theory since 2019, and a couple years ago, and you kind of get to know faces and people a little bit because people go to the same classes. 8:15 Saturday. And a couple years ago, Laura and some other folks started talking to me because you had suffered a tragic series of losses here in the community with young people dying by suicide. And they were asking for help. They knew, you kind of get to know people a little bit. People knew I was the superintendent in Rye down in New York. And they were asking if I had any resources for them or any advice for them. And sadly, we had suffered a tragic loss when I was in Rye. And it was the first time I lived that as a school administrator. But it was an incredibly powerful learning experience for me and my team. And I shared everything that we learned with Laura and the folks from Orange Theory, and that began a friendship at the gym and a connection to the Darien Public Schools. Because to me, when you're dealing with a challenge like that in a community, you need all the help you can get. And I was happy to share it because it was not an easy situation for us. Rye is a significantly smaller community, and it was a real challenge, but we learned a tremendous amount. And over the years, I've shared that. And anytime I heard of a superintendent who was grappling with the situation, we sent clinicians to help. We offered to help. We offered to do communication for them, anything we could. And so fast forward to this past spring, I had announced my retirement back in October 2024 for the end of the school year. And so I was just loving life, doing my last budget in Rye, preparing for the end of the school year, enjoying all that great stuff. And one day, Laura says, "Hey, did you hear Dr. Adley announced his retirement?" And I said, "That's great for him. Congratulations. Another person retiring. Good for Alan." And she said, "Would you be willing to talk to somebody? We need to figure out what we're going to do." And the rest is history. So,
but the funny thing is that the person I connected you with was also another Orange Theory member who was on the Board of Ed, John Cini, right? So,
and I didn't know John from Orange
John.
Theory at that time.
Right. So
Yeah.
John was my first text, and I put the two of them together, and the rest is history, I guess.
So Laura,
so we should all join Orange Theory is the message for tonight's fireside chat.
I am not a spokesperson for Orange Theory, but
no, I'm teasing. Okay. All right. So we're going to dig into the questions. Dr. Byrne mentioned that we did receive some questions from the community, so thank you for those who submitted them. We took a look at them and we grouped them together primarily because there were some themes that we saw. But we're going to start with something that is not related to the topic tonight, which is the vision of the graduate or the questions yet. We're going to start with a question that I know is on everyone's mind, which is, I'm hoping I'm speaking for everybody here, but we are thrilled that you accepted the permanent superintendent's position here in Darien. Right? You recently retired from a high-performing New York City school, another district similar to Darien, Rye, after a very successful 8 years. What attracted you most the first time, considering to come in and step in as the interim, but then ultimately the permanent role?
Great question, Laura. Thank you so much. So initially, I had nothing better planned, other than I was going to actually learn to fly fish. When I was a kid, I used to fly fish up in the Catskills, and over the years, it just wasn't time in my life to do that. So we literally, my wife planned a little vacation right after the school year. I took my very first fly fishing lesson in many years, and that was the end of my fly fishing career in retirement. But, I had my first conversations with the board back in the spring, and they just seemed to me at that point to be a really great group of people dedicated to the work they were doing, and there was a need. And I'm a helper. That's what I do. I've always worked in public service, and to me, there was an opportunity, there was a need, and I live not too far from here, so it was a no-brainer. I knew I wasn't intended in fully retiring. I just wasn't sure what I was going to do yet. I was sort of waffling between doing some teaching, doing some consulting, and when I met the board, and it was one night last spring, we sat in the conference room there, I thought it was a terrific moment. It just felt right, and I felt like I could help this nice group of people out, and we'll go from there. So that was the initial piece, but over the ensuing months, one of the things that I've always loved to do is build. I love to, if I wasn't an educator, I might be an architect or an engineer or somebody that does projects. Not that I'm talented with my hands, but I love to identify what the opportunities are to either fix things or improve things or set up structures. It's always been of interest to me. And so in the first few months, in meeting with the board, meeting with the staff, sort of looking at things that the community needs and the school district needs, I started to see opportunities that fit my skill set. And as the months went on, and the work with the board and building that connection, and the work with the team, my colleagues who are here this evening, it just felt like, well, let's see where this goes. We've got the rest of the year. They're doing a search. We'll see where the search ends up. And that was really important, and it just felt good. So also getting to know the community a little bit and what's important here, because every community is different. And yes, what we're trying to do in schools is always the same. We're trying to help kids get the skills and knowledge they need to be successful beyond their life in school. And parents need help navigating that, because we're all generally doing it for the first time when we go through it. Here there is a lot of alignment in what I value most as an individual and as an educator. We're striving for excellence here, but we're recognizing, and it's clear to me that the community, and maybe it's a struggle for some, is grappling with how do you strive for excellence without focusing on perfection. And that's a really important piece, because the other thing that was really striking to me, and I think this goes back to the community's commitment after those tragic losses, is the real commitment to the mental health of the children in the community, which is really important. And I have lots of crazy theories that I'm happy to talk to anybody about, but I think about, and I have a 26-year-old, so she's in this weird generation right now who lived through COVID in college, and I think about I compare what our kids are going through now and what I did as a 57, almost 58-year-old. I knew, it was pretty clear to me what I needed to do to go beyond where my parents were. It was pretty clear what I needed, and it was all around me. Like, there was a clear path to making a better life for myself. I'm not sure that's so clear for the kids today. First of all, many of them, the notion of, and this has been sort of an American notion for many years, you always do better than the next generation does better. In communities like Darien, in Pound Ridge, where I raised my daughter, in Rye and Chappaqua, where I worked for many years, that might not be realistic for the kids. So I think about that pressure, that is that natural pressure that's just there. And that's got to be really tough. And my daughter is starting to be able to talk about that now at 26 with her own small business that's brand new. But I think about what that does to kids and the pressure that puts on them. And so the notion of tending to the mental health and wellness of our students was something that struck me very early on, meeting Alicia Dad and seeing the incredible volunteerism that is focused on supporting the well-being of our kids here in Darien. That sent such a strong message to me. And, you know, if you're tending to those things, you can get to the other stuff. That's a big one. You can figure out the academics. You can improve your skill as a teacher. You can get better programs for academic pieces. You can make buses run on a better schedule. There are all sorts of things you can do. But once a community has made a decision to commit to the well-being and mental health of our kids, that's a game changer. So.
I'm sure something that's on everybody's mind whenever there's somebody new in a role like this is what's going to be different, right? What can we expect to be different compared to previous superintendents?
All right, so I would say that when I first got here, I put together an entry plan. I invited anybody that wanted to come, and some of you here came and met with me. I reached out to community organizations, met with folks, reached out to town, but I opened the door to any staff members that wanted to come, and I wanted to learn from them what they valued about Darien schools and what they saw as strengths, what they saw as needs, and ideas that they had for improvement. That's part of the way I operate. I want people to feel comfortable to come to me. I would much prefer you call me Eric than Dr. Byrne. I reserve that for certain friends and my older brothers. Just a little bit of torture from the youngest of four. But accessibility is one, and being available and approachable, being present. So I try to go to lots of things. Tomorrow night, going to the show at the high school, being at the football game Friday night for almost the first half. Going to the art show at the bagel shop last week. And to me, I think we're celebrating in all of these different community events, we're celebrating our children, and we're celebrating what they are experiencing in school. So it's accessibility, communication, and I took a lot of lessons from being a parent of a school-age child about how the system did or did not interface with families that I live every day. My wife and I were both workers, and it was incredible because I was the principal of that school, and we did a lot and while there weren't many working families in Pound Ridge at that time, we felt like the ones that were, we needed to do things to make the school available to them and make it easier for them to participate. So we did nighttime events, and we did early morning events so that things were possible for our working families. When I left, there was a shift, and we couldn't ever get to anything without not working, and it wasn't always so hard. I was a principal in another school at the time, and leaving school as a principal is a really difficult thing. So If my daughter was in a performance, sometimes I couldn't get there. Parent-teacher conferences were in the middle of the day, which was not always easy. So those kinds of pieces and trying to be more open and more welcoming and more supportive of our community as a whole is something that is really important to me. I think that what you'll also see and hear is I'm pretty direct with what I think we can do to improve. And I really appreciate that the board hadn't kicked me out right out of the gate, because the first time we sat and met, we had a long meeting on a July day, and we talked about all the things we could do together to improve. Not everybody wants to hear that. But again, I think that's part of what I felt with the board, is that they want to improve. They want to become more efficient and more effective. And so I'm going to try and guide that work and support that, but being frank and being open and honest. I think I wrote something early on, being generous with information and celebrating our good things, but also being frank about our challenges. And so maybe that's something that you'll see that's different. And I may have wandered off on a crazy bird walk there, and I apologize, but.
You're good. You're good. Okay. Eric has agreed to 2 of these, just so you know, so there will be a second Fireside Chat in the spring, because he has really embraced the vision. Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. The vision of the graduate, which is the district's strategic long-term vision for our students to shape academically strong, resilient, and innovative graduates centered around 6 core competencies: communication, creativity, curiosity, empathy, independence, and integrity. Tonight we are focusing on 3 of these, and in the spring we'll focus on the other 3. So tonight the focus is around communication, creativity, and curiosity. That is a mouthful, right? It is not easy to remember. It sounds very lofty. In your words, why is this important? Since you came here, you have really gravitated towards this. Why is that?
So I've done a fair amount of research over the last couple of years in my career on the skills and knowledge and ability that our kids need for success beyond schooling. And it's a different world than when I went to PS 22 in Staten Island and Port Richmond High School. It was pretty simple then. I had to memorize a whole lot of information, take exams, and move on to the next step. In the neighborhood I grew up in, there were a few paths for you. You either got a job for the city of New York in some capacity. There were lots of police and firemen in my neighborhood. Or if you were one of the outliers, you may have went to college and followed some sort of professional career path. Today, though, it's not so simple. And I talked to the faculty about this at Convocation, our opening ceremony. There's been a tremendous amount of research around the world because, one, our kids are going to a seriously global marketplace when they leave us. It's not, it's not the small town or just the state or the city, that 30, 40 years ago when they left school, they were going to have a pretty local existence beyond school, except for maybe the outliers. And so there have been a number of organizations and studies about what the workforce needs. And so if you backfill that, which are communication skills, collaboration skills, global competence, and all of these skills that are very different, they are not so tangible and not so easy to label and identify. They're really important skills that kids need to do the jobs, many of which, if we think about, and I know there was a question about AI here, just the impact of technology in the last 10 years on all of our lives. I think of as a principal, so I was a principal from 1999 to 2010 or 11. In that time, we went from having a random computer here or there in the school. I was principal of a school in Manhattan on 66th Street between First and York, And we celebrated when we got money to put a T1 line in the school that connected to the one computer we had in the library. We did not use email yet. In my last year, they announced this email system called First Class in the New York City public schools. And Harold Levy would push out messages to all the schools through this First Class thing that nobody knew anything about. We took attendance with bubble sheets, and I filled out a bubble sheet for every period for my kids. So, and by the time I left as a principal in 2010 or 11, whichever year it was, I had gone from having a telephone with push buttons and a computer that I used for word processing and really nothing else, no internet, to I had a BlackBerry. They still existed, and I even saw in Chappaqua from 2007 to 11 the transformation. My first BlackBerry was almost as big as this piece of paper, and it literally was more like one of those scientific calculators that we use. Well, they're even small now, but if we just look at a window like that in our adult lives of how much technology has changed and how much the workforce has changed. I mean, there are jobs today that didn't exist 5 years ago. And I'm not talking about like being an influencer, which all of our kids, yours and mine, whether you have a second grader or a 26-year-old like mine, they all think of being an influencer as a job. And there are people making a lot of money on that. But what the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is an international organization that tracks global economy pieces and the workforce, the World Economic Forum, McKinsey, Forbes, all of these organizations that have done research on skills, communication, collaboration, curiosity, the ability to solve complex problems, those are the things they're asking for. And in fact, I saw an article, I didn't get to read it yet this week, about one of the tech companies that is not even interested in looking at college graduates anymore. They're just plucking kids from graduating from high school and training them in what they need to know to be successful in those jobs, because it's skill-based and not knowledge-based anymore. So I think the vision really speaks to developing those skills. And it's a pretty lofty task, because one of the things that people are always going to ask about is, well, how do you know you're getting at it? And that's really hard, because measuring communication, there isn't a standardized test that's going to necessarily tell you if you're doing a good job with communication or collaboration. There are ways to do it that we have to design and we have to implement, but it's a really challenging piece. And so the days of just measuring schools by academic knowledge acquisition or standardized test scores are really not telling the true story of what kids need when they leave us. And we don't necessarily know what they're going, if we focus on knowledge and just focus on giving them very specific batches of knowledge to take with them when they leave us, and we forget the skills, when they leave us, they're going to be left behind, because the knowledge is going to change. The access of knowledge is going to change. Just from the time that I was a principal in that window of 12 or 13 years that it was, how you accessed information radically changed. Email became the main mode of communication. So again, I ramble a lot, I apologize, but I think it's thinking about the skills and communication, collaboration, creativity, curiosity, the ability to work with other people who are different is really important, and I think the vision speaks to that.
Hopefully, many of you in this room have seen the new community newsletter that Eric puts out every month. It is designed to show how the vision of the graduate is actually put into practice at all of the schools every single day. Holmes was just featured in October. The high school was the first issue, and all of the schools will be featured. They will all address how the vision is coming to life in their schools every day. And if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to read it because it's really amazing how this is being woven through all of our schools across the district. Okay, we're going to dig into the 3 C's. Okay, we're going to come back to AI. AI is going to be at the end.
All right.
And we're
AI
going to
scares me.
Yeah, I know. We're going to spend a little time on AI, but not right now. Okay, we're going to start with creativity. If you haven't read The Vision of the Graduate, creativity is described as encouraging our students to embrace the trial and error process and see mistakes as opportunities. In a high-achieving culture like Darien, how do we practically create classroom environments where students feel psychologically safe to fail and are rewarded for taking smart, creative risks, not just for getting the right answers on the first try?
I think that's a really hard one. And as parents, it's a really hard one to watch our kids fail. And so I've been working really hard at this because when you have a kid that starts a business and you see them making decisions and you start questioning them, you want to jump in and change direction. But I'm trying to practice what I preach, which is I have to give her those opportunities to figure the things out that work and don't work. So I think one, as educators, as teachers and administrators in our schools, we have to work really hard to create environments where it's okay to fail. And sometimes the notion of failure in school could be working against what's happening at home because it's really hard to watch our kids fail. And sometimes they have a hard time with that. Sometimes they're really emotional with that. And as parents, we love our children and we want to comfort them and support them. And we may feel like we're not doing our jobs as parents if we're letting our kids experience that really challenging time or discomfort. It's not easy. And I can't tell you that it's going to get any easier as your kids get older because even folks who have children older than mine may say the same exact thing. They're going to continue to do things that are different than the way we do things. But as educators, so we need to basically work to create a culture within the schools where it's okay to fail. But and what happens when you do that is it gives kids the opportunity to explore a little bit more. What educational systems have done really well over the years is we've sort of squashed that creativity in kids. So if you think of the 4.5, 5-year-old that comes to kindergarten, and you're often probably thinking, thank God I'm dropping them at school because they asked me why 27 times just on the way to school, and it's exhausting. You know, why did the dog do that? Why is that cloud looking like that? Why does the car make that noise? I mean, you hear that all the time, and it is within them. That's how they operate. They want to understand everything, and they'll try and take things apart to figure them out. And sometimes as parents, we don't want them to take things apart because we can't ever get them back together again. And that's really something that we've done a great job to get rid of in schools because we've often focused on compliance and getting kids to do what we want them to do. And I talked about my report card earlier in the school year at one of the board meetings because if I think back to my school report cards, and Amy, I'm not going to make you show yours tonight. Amy Fettigan, Dr. Fettigan is our assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction assessment. She found her elementary school report cards last week and brought them in. So now I've got this material. It's great. But there was a whole section on my report card about my ability to sit still and pay attention and listen to directions and all those kinds of things. And you may not think this looking at me today, but I was not very good at any of those things. I'm not very good at sitting still now, which is impressive because I'm not wheeling around the room yet in this chair on casters. But so schools have done a really good job setting up systems for kids to fit the mold of what we want them to do, and that starts to crush the questioning. That starts to crush the creativity. You know, in the old days, kids used to go outside and they'd figure out what to do when they were playing in the yard. And if you had 4 children like mine, you didn't need any other children around because we just did all those things with each other and figured out how to entertain ourselves. And yes, it was a different world. Parents felt more comfortable just sending your kids out and telling them to come back for dinner time. But, you know, there was that creativity that came with the lack of structure and with the freedom. And as school systems have had all these other things layered on top, the standardized tests that used to just be in certain grade levels that now from 1998 or 99 had to happen at 3rd grade through 8th grade. We had to test every year in English language arts and math. And there's a time and a place and a reason for those kinds of things for standardized tests, but we went from every couple of years to every year, and it started to push out the things that gave kids the ability to develop that creativity, that gave kids the ability to just explore. You know, choice time started disappearing. Block time disappeared. You went kindergartens where block time used to be, or center time, and blocks were just one of them. You started to see schools where you would go and they'd be doing handwriting in kindergarten in September instead of learning how to talk to people. And I think the last few years, a lot of systems, and I believe here in Darien, have tried to strike that balance between how do we navigate those demands that are put upon us and how do we give our kids the ability to learn those kinds of things and be creative. But it's always a constant pressure. So I think the creativity piece, number one, comes from the environment, the safety of the environment to fail, and the ability for kids to explore different things. And as a principal, early in my career, I was a big fan of bringing people in to help facilitate during recess. I had a very engaged parent-teacher organization at PS 183. They raised tons of money, and what I didn't have in school funding from the city of New York, I had from them. So they would give me money to hire people to come and do organized games at recess. By the time I left being a principal, I was the greatest opponent of bringing people in to do organized games at recess because I didn't think it was serving our kids well in a lot of different ways. So I think those are some of the struggles that we've dealt with in schools over the last number of years. But there are so many places and opportunities where we could be allowing that creativity to flourish that we've struggled with over the last number of years as a public educational system. So as parents, I would say the one takeaway I would give you is it's okay for your kids to fail. Don't jump into getting tutors and extra help and calling up the teacher and saying, my kid's never had this kind of grade before, because that in the long run, that's not going to serve them well. In the long run, I'm talking after they're out of our system, because once they go out on their own, they're going to experience failure. If they go to college, they're going to experience failure, or the military, or a career path. And if we don't, as educators with them as 5-year-olds in the classroom, or 10-year-olds or 17-year-olds in the classroom, if we don't allow that, it's not going to develop naturally. So, more rambling from me.
Okay, we're going to move on to curiosity. Curiosity, according to the vision, champions fearless exploration of the unknown and its questioning with persistence. How do we meaningfully measure and reward this process of inquiry rather than just measuring a student's ability to memorize and repeat correct information?
I got in a lot of trouble for questioning with persistence. The biggest trouble I got in was Sister Joan in CCD when we were learning all about creation, and I was very interested in nonfiction reading, and I took all these books out of the PS22 library on evolution, and I was questioning with persistence and got myself suspended from CCD. which you would expect with the fourth child. Any other fourth children out there, or youngest? All right, all right, we have a few of us out there. But I think that sometimes for us as teachers, trying to accomplish all the things we're trying to accomplish in a classroom, the questioning gets cut off. And the opportunity for kids to question, because we always think of, in school, I think we often default to whatever we experienced. So what I experienced as a student was a teacher at the front of the room who was the center of everything that we were doing. What we're trying to do differently here in the Darien schools is that the teacher isn't the focus of what we're doing. It's the children that are a focus of what we're doing. So if we want children to learn how to question, it's not by questioning back and forth in that, what do we call popcorn style with the teacher, but it's putting kids together in pairs and small groups and giving them the ability to learn how to question each other around a particular topic or a particular activity. So I think that the encouragement by us as educators and parents to question things and explore things is really important. I also think the relevance piece and the importance for kids is really important, giving kids some kind of choice. Now, most of the time it's going to be managed choice, and I've always used this as the example because I learned this from one of my superintendents when I was a principal. She used to say, I love choice, and we're going to give everybody all the choice. You're going to have eggs, but you're going to choose how you're going to have those eggs. And I think that's a good thing for us to think about as educators. Choice is really important, and kids sometimes, if it's so open-ended, it overwhelms them and they can't. But if we structure it in such a way that they have a range of choices, and our teachers are really good at knowing what kids are interested in. So in early grades, you find book bins with dinosaurs and trucks, and you have the series books, and we learn about what are the series books that are most interested to our kids, and we think about that, we tell that to them. So we have choice that gives kids an opportunity to make some decisions on their own and explore, and we set up our classrooms so that's the case. But again, it also goes back to that ability to fail piece, because if we want our kids to be curious, if we want our kids to question, if we want them to be creative, then they have to be able to try something out, for them to fail, and to try it again. And the block example is the greatest example, because in the old days, and thankfully I've seen blocks as I've walked around here, in the old days, kids would have blocks were a center, and they would build something, and inevitably they would build it to the point that it would collapse. And what they did after that, for the most part, is they started all over again. And they tried to figure out how to build what they were trying to build. And it may not sound like it's a really important thing, it's a really important thing. So if you've got little ones at home and everybody has Legos now. But Legos are different now. They used to just be a big tub of Legos and you figured out what to do with them. Now they give you a kit. My nephew, who's now a freshman in college, every Lego set was a set and it had a design. But Tinker Toys, I know I'm definitely dating myself, but stuff to build and stuff to create with. Lots of kids like art projects and just figuring out, but not the art projects where it's a kit that you're always going to end up with something, having the ability to create something new out of whatever materials you have.
I think what is hopefully becoming obvious the more we talk about the vision is that they're all interconnected to each other, that they don't live in isolation. It's not you master one, you move over here, and then you do that, and you move over here and do something else, right? They do work.
Definitely not.
Right? And so the next one, which is my personal favorite as the communicator in the room, is communication, which strongly emphasizes a two-way exchange. And for our kids, I mentioned I have 3 kids. My oldest is 23. My youngest graduated from DHS last year. They are digital natives. They communicate through their phones. for me as a parent, I often worry that they don't know how to communicate because they only know how to communicate through a screen, right? So this, I think, is a very important one, especially as they leave our schools and go out into the world. So for communication, which is about a two-way exchange with listening, with a discerning ear, in the classroom specifically, how do we actively teach and assess listening and collaboration skills?
So one of the phrases you've probably heard a lot over the years in our schools is turn and talk. We start with kindergarten in turn and talks, and our teachers will take kids and model, and sometimes teachers will bring, kindergarten teachers will have first graders come back in the beginning of the year and model how to talk to each other for the new kindergartners. And you see those kinds of things in elementary school all the time. The piece that we often forget is the listening piece, and the place where they learn the best listening skills is from the models around them and by practicing. So what seems like it should just be innate is something that we have to develop and we have to set the stage for in the classroom. But as teachers, again, when you have a whole load of kids in your room, the listening piece might get lost because you're trying to take care of everybody's needs. But having the ability, and you'll see teachers do this really well when they're trying to do small groups, they'll have rules in the room. Like, if I have this certain hat on, you can't ever interrupt me. And I had rules in my classroom. I taught 5th and 6th grade for a while at PS 183. And it was really, if there was no blood or fire, you did not interrupt me when I was with another student or a small group. You could say it like that with 5th and 6th graders. I'm not sure I would say that with 1st graders. Or these savvy kids in Manhattan who are 5th and 6th graders. They laughed and they knew you don't interrupt Mr. Byrne when he's with somebody. That sends a strong message, and that's really important modeling for our kids. But I also think you talk about devices. I think about there's a commercial running about the phones, and it's about driving, and it's on the radio. I listen to sports talk radio all the time, and clearly this is aimed at the men who are listening to WFAN and looking at their phones when they're driving. But you have a little girl's voice talking to the parent, and you can tell that the parent is distracted. And the message is that, the phone. And while that's not the message I'm trying to get to tonight, I think that our distractibility and our, as parents and educators, like sitting down and really listening to our kids and looking at them and facing them with our bodies, those are really important modeling elements that we can do that are going to help our kids know how to be listeners. So it's the ability to listen, it's the ability to speak and express yourself verbally, it's the ability to write and express yourself in a written manner, it's the ability to read and take in information and analyze that information. That's a big piece because you're learning really important skills from the minute you walk through our doors through the minute you leave us. And you'll see that in our system in many different ways. I was in a high school AP Bio class last week, walking around, and kids were doing an experiment, which Ms. Dunn and I also did, where we rinsed our mouths with this tea that completely numbed our taste buds. And then we had to taste all these different things, sugar, and not that we should be giving kids packets of sugar in high school, but we couldn't taste any of it. So the sugar just tasted like sand. But kids were talking in pairs about the experiment that they were doing. And it was pretty clear that we've done a pretty good job seeing this group of 12th grade AP students communicating. And I'll also say that when I was at the Unified Soccer Tournament at Fairfield last weekend, I saw very similar levels of communication between our special needs students who were competing and communicating with their typically developing peers and with each other as they played soccer. And that was really impressive too. So it's clear as an outsider who's just come in and is observing and learning that that kind of communication has been valued and been placed as a priority here in the Darien schools. But those are really important pieces, and it takes time. So the reading skills, we're trying to develop automaticity with kids. So we're calling out and naming things and discussing strategies that hopefully by the time they're in 4th and 5th grade, they'll never think about those things again because they'll just be automatic in what they do. So the communication piece is a really big piece.
Okay, we're going to take questions from the audience soon, specific to the 3Cs, but we did get a handful of other questions that I want to make sure that we get to. These came in through the Google form from the community, and there were a handful of questions specific to start times. What is your take on the importance of mental and physical health of the students to excel at the 3Cs that we've been talking about, specifically as it relates to the Healthy Start Times proposal? Will you take any steps to explore pushing high school or middle school start times?
So the board has heard me say this a lot all the time. Please let me know when I'm about to step on a landmine. So I feel like I'm about to step on a landmine here. So I know that there have been conversations over the last few years about school start times here. It's not a simple answer, but I will say that we have, the board and I have been talking about, there's a bunch of things that are connected to it. So number one, right now, we are working with the town on exploring the notion or the concept of getting a bus depot. So that's an important piece. And why is it important? Because right now, we have those big yellow buses that pick up your children in the morning. It's a contracted vendor called First Student. First Student brings their buses from a yard where they park them in Stamford. First Student was also the only company that responded to our request for proposals for busing in Darien. And the reason why they are the only company, because we have asked the others who bid in this area, is because we don't have a bus depot. Just today, Rich Rudel, our business manager, gave me the numbers because we have a follow-up meeting with the town. So I do want to mention, we have some Board of Education folks here tonight. So our board chair, Robin Nelson, is hiding back there. We've got our new board member, Bill Vredenberg. We've got Sarah Parent and Joanna Walsh. And we had a meeting, several of us, with the town a few weeks ago, and we left with very specific tasks that they had on the town side and that we had on the school side. The financial analysis of what the impact would be if we had a bus depot was our task. And so we have a spreadsheet that we put together that what is the cost for First Student with us using their bus depot. And we went to the other companies and asked them very basically, if we had a bus depot, what would the cost be? And so we have that analysis for a town. There's about a $500,000 to $600,000, $500,000 to $700,000 swing per year if we had a bus depot. But it's not so simple because you got to have a place for the bus depot. There's land, there's facilities you have to have. So it's not like we have just a vacant bus depot hanging around in town somewhere. And most of the land in Darien is either privately owned or developed or is already serving some kind of purpose. But what the town is doing is on their end, they're looking at available properties. One, they're looking at properties that are owned by the town that could feasibly, with some sort of process, become a site for a bus depot. They're also looking at properties that are potentially available for purchase that could serve that. So when we come back together, and the plan is, and it's probably already set up, the plan is before Thanksgiving that we're going to come back with our information, they're going to come back with their information, and we're going to figure out what's next. So the reason I say that is because whether or not we have a bus depot is a significant factor in that because of the cost-related issues. Number two is, and I met with some folks over the summer who shared with me some research and background, and I will say the reason I did not come in with a lot of background in this, we didn't have buses in Rye. We had an 8 o'clock start. It's a really tiny town. I think it's less than a mile from one end to the next. It's not very far, but it's like out of a Norman Rockwell painting. The kids walk and bike to school because it's so dense a community. So I reached out to the superintendents of the districts that the folks I met with over in the summer told me had either made changes in the last bunch of years or what, different districts that had made some modifications. So New Canaan was one, Wilton was another, and Greenwich was the third. What I learned is that Greenwich had to go back on it because they had significant financial issues related to the change. So they went back on the school change. And it's hard to compare Greenwich to us because of the size. It's just so much bigger and there are so many more complicating factors. New Canaan, I believe they're an 8 o'clock start. And they shifted from something like a 7:30 or 7:20 or 7:40 to an 8 o'clock start. They're a bit smaller. Their bus routes don't cover as many places. They don't have as many schools. But one of the things that Brian shared with me, the superintendent, is that it pushes a whole bunch of things on the other end. So one of the things that has occurred is that they have many more kids leaving school early because while we may change the school time, the after-school things don't change their times. So right now we already have a situation where kids, and a great many of our kids participate in some sort of team. Every now and then when they have an away game, they might have to leave early to get to that away game. What he shared with me is that those numbers went through the roof of kids leaving early. So that's something you have to sort of factor into and figure out, is there a way around that? Wilton is different because of the way they do their busing. And they did it a really long time ago. And I think they're the latest start, but they did some changes. They're a little smaller. They have fewer schools that they're grappling with. But Kevin's been a great resource to me since I arrived. So I'm continuing that conversation with him. That being said, I do think we owe the community information about this as to whether or not it is or is not feasible and why. And that's something that I know the board and I will work on once we get to that point. We need to resolve this bus depot piece first, because to do a study on the time, we need to know whether or not we're going to have the bus depot, because there are all sorts of ramifications with that. So yes, it's something we need to look at. It is something that we need to study, and we need to bring experts in to guide us. I am not equipped to do that kind of study. Rich is not equipped to do that kind of study. We need people that do this for a living. And so that's something we will work through. But we will have a more robust conversation at the right time. And I don't see that time very far into the future. We've got finite time to get answers to questions about a whole bunch of things. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Okay, the next one is around DEIB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the question is, despite the goal of lifting students, DEIB seems to be divisive. How will you unite our students, ensuring all graduates from Darien High feel confident and unashamed in sharing their ideas and curiosity?
So this is certainly a topic that has been challenging in lots of communities across the country. The one thing I will say is that I've talked to a lot of our kids. I've just plopped myself at tables in the cafeteria at the high school. Our kids don't need us to unite them. Often they just need us to get out of their way so that they could be kids and they could do what they do. They see the world very differently than we do. That being said, I'm not exactly sure what occurred in the past here. But what I will say is that our job as educators, and my job as a superintendent, is to support every single student so that every single kid that comes through our doors feels loved, cared for, known, and they feel like they belong here. And that's a simple task for us. It's not always easy, but our job is to make kids feel that. We don't want any kids to feel ashamed. We don't want any kids, no matter how old, how young, what they look like, we don't want any kids to feel that they are not a part of our community. And so we need to do that. We need to look and see internally, are there things that we're doing that are making kids feel a certain way or feel marginalized, and look at those carefully and address them. Whether it's in, that kids feel that they don't have access to something, well, let's understand the problem a little bit and fix it. But you don't fix a problem for one child by making a problem for another child. Our job is to support all of the children and make them all feel like they belong. Here's the other piece that I think is really important, and I've heard board members say this across the table over the past couple of months. There has not been a more insane time in our country in the world of politics on whatever side of the aisle you live on. What we do in schools should not be focused on what's happening in the ideological culture wars of the national politic. When I step through the door, I'm the superintendent for every single child in this school system to support all of them. When our teachers come through the door, that's their job as well. Whatever's happening in Washington or Hartford, or when I was in New York and Albany, that should be inconsequential. Politics should be out of the schools. And if as a family, there's something that's making your child uncomfortable or you uncomfortable, call us. Talk to your principal. Call me. I'll sit with you and help you figure it out. But our job is to keep that noise out of the schools, make our schools joyful, accepting places where all kids can succeed. And that's something we'll keep working on. But if you ask the kids, they don't want any of that nonsense either. They just want to be kids and enjoy their friends and be here in school.
Okay, we're almost done, everybody. We got 2 left. Okay, the next one, it's like impossible to avoid AI, right? AI, the conversation about AI, the role it's playing in our lives, in our kids' lives, in their futures. How do you see AI being integrated and used by students in the K-5 curriculum?
Oy vey is what I say with. So I had a great answer to this, and my wife was telling me about the book she's reading for her book club, and it's all about AI, and it was really frightening to me. Thank God it's fiction, but really you could hear things about AI today that were fiction 3 weeks ago. Well, first, just so you know a little bit about me, I'm an old school dinosaur when it comes to technology. Like, when social media came out, I remember I was in Chappaqua and everybody was like, oh, we got to get the kids on Twitter, we've got to do all, and I was like, no. Before anybody knew all of the horrible evils of social media, schools were jumping on the social media bandwagon, and I was very resistant to that because I'm just old. I'm not on social media myself, and I worried, like, it's this new thing. We don't know enough about it. So I say that a lot about AI right now. We don't know enough about what it is, let alone today, nor what it's going to be in 6 months. Because with the amount of money that's being invested into AI, the systems and the platforms that exist today are going to be radically different in a short period of time. But here's what I'll say. There definitely is potential for AI to have a positive impact on what's happening in schools today, even in elementary school. And the key for us is that we have to be very, very mindful and committed to safety and security and privacy. And there are a lot of privacy laws that we live under in schools that you should just be relieved to know that they exist. Like, we can't work with certain tech companies if they can't guarantee us levels of privacy because they're all collecting data when we use their platforms. And so there are very strict requirements and laws in Connecticut for us to be able to use certain platforms. we have pretty good strict guidelines in place that I know there was a discussion last year. Those are going to be regularly evaluated and updated as necessary. And that changing is really important because as the platforms change and the technology changes, we need to be paying close attention to that, and our technology committee needs to be working on modifying our guidelines all along the way. We're launching in December our very first parent university, and that's going to be on K-3 literacy. It's a new part of our communications and our outreach. It's a new format to help parents understand what we're doing and how you can help. Tim McGuire, our coordinator for technology, who some of us got to see speak at a meeting in town, the HSPC. I have no idea what that stands for, but there are all these amazing people who volunteer in town, and Tim was on a panel about AI. But Tim said to me the other day he wants, our fire went out. Tim wants the opportunity to do a parent university on AI for elementary parents, so we're going to work on that. But we have limited AI use in elementary school right now. But just so you know, as parents, your kids are exposed to AI in a lot of ways at home. If you've got an Alexa device, your kids are dealing with AI. If they have phones and they have Apple phones with Siri, and I guess Android phone, Google phones, those phones are all operating on AI. And that's something to just think about. Google is now, the backbone of it has an AI piece to it. So if you haven't done a Google search lately, do a Google search when you get home tonight, and you'll see the first thing you get is the AI description of it. So our kids
Which, by the way, is not always accurate.
No, not
Don't
at all.
trust it.
Yeah. AI, no, the AI, the models are learning, so they're, and I always go back to, what was that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie with Linda Hamilton? I think of AI and Terminator. Yeah, the original Terminator, but I have a little bit of anxiety around AI. But we're using, the platform that's most used in elementary school is one called School AI, and you'll find it, teachers are scared of AI. Our librarians are more comfortable with AI. So you'll see that some librarians are using it for some projects, and you could do really cool things. Like you could do an interview with George Washington through School AI. But one of the pieces that's really helpful is there's really built in on a micro level monitoring system. So I was learning about this week with Tim. All the kids, the teachers have a dashboard, and they see what every child is doing with the chatbot on their screens. So they see exactly what the kids are putting in and exactly what the bot is putting out. And it has keywords that trigger things. So if you have a child that puts something in that's inappropriate, there's a flashing red box on the screen that tells the teacher that that's the case. So that's really one piece. But again, the big piece is that the way this is going to continue to evolve, we need to continue to evolve as well. So I know it's not a great answer because this is like the wild, wild west for us, but I tend to be more conservative with these kinds of things, and I think that our rollout is trying to be appropriately conservative with our elementary kids, and I think that's really important.
All right, last question. Last question is about the budget. It's hard to believe it's budget season again. It has officially started. What is your approach to casting the budget and making decisions with the right inputs?
So in addition to communication, one of the things I heard a lot about over the summer from the board and folks I met with is that we needed to bring some sanity to the budget development process in the school district. So I spent a lot of time watching budget meetings, talking to folks, learning as much as I could about the budget process. And it is a little different in Connecticut than in New York. So I'm learning, thanks to folks in the town who have been educating me and helping me, how the process is different. So in New York, I used to do a public referendum. So we would build a budget, I would present it to the board, we would, over a series of months, hash it out, make changes, bring it forth. The board would then adopt it, and then it would be a town referendum on the third Tuesday in May. So I would then hit the road. We called it the Budget Roadshow. I would go everywhere in the community, not just to PTO meetings. I would go to the senior center. If you know Rye, the Osborne home, I was a regular there to present, because there was the narrative that all the retired folks in town voted down the budget, which was absolutely not the case. But I went to the synagogue, to the churches, to the Lions Club, the Rotary Club. We did a comprehensive roadshow to help everyone understand what the budget was, so that when they voted for it, they understood what they were voting for. I have learned that it's a little different here, and I have 107 people that I need to convince to support the budget once the board adopts it. And some of them are here tonight, so it's really good to have them here in the RTM and the Board of Finance. So what's most important to me is that, and to the board, and I think to the community, is what I heard loud and clear, is that our budget development needs to be driven by the needs of our children and the programs in our schools. And we need to start from there. We need to explain what that is, explain what the money's going to do and why we need it, and then tell that story very clearly to the entire community, so that everyone understands what we're asking for. And so a couple of weeks ago, I started that process. And it's a little early. I won't present a budget until January, but we presented a fiscal forecast. And what I said to the folks, and we spent the last few weeks meeting with folks from the town, with community organizations, and sharing this process that is slightly different, where we present a fiscal forecast that shares what our priorities are, which we did 2 weeks ago, and then we have a series of conversations over the coming months from January 8th, when I present the comprehensive budget, and then there'll be 3 meetings where different departments will present their budgets. And all along the way, beginning with 2 weeks ago, there's public engagement, there's the ability for people to ask questions, and discuss these components of the budget publicly. I will also be sharing that information with the community. So I've met with CDSP, and we talked about how they had this huge task of communicating all the budget information to the community. That's my responsibility. That is our responsibility. So much like if you've been reading my Friday updates, you'll see there's a board meeting. I've sent Amy out a few times. Like, if you want to hear Amy talk about assessment results, click here. It starts at whatever time. You're going to get that with the budget. I believe we sent that fiscal forecast on Friday, and so that we're going to push the information out to you so that you could see it, you can digest it, you could think about it, you can send us questions, you can come and ask your questions and participate in those discussions as we do those presentations over the series of months. And then what we'll do is, after those conversations, we will take all of the feedback we've heard, the discussions from the board, and we will work to achieve consensus on any modifications at the board table, so that we make any revisions to the proposed budget, and then we bring a budget to the board for consideration of adoption that would then go through the rest of the stages of the process. So there are some things that were triggers for folks, and emotional triggers for folks, like Ad Cut Night and Super Saturday. I heard a lot about these existing structures, and we're trying to do this without those structures this year. We're hoping that the engagement and the in-depth discussions through those series of meetings and the pushing out of information will help get everyone what they need to understand what we're trying to do. So I live in a world, and I've committed to the board, of no surprises. I got a new nickname. My old job, I was Dr. No Fun, because I was the guy, and Sarah can tell you, she checked my references and heard all about that. I got a new nickname. I'm Dr. No Surprises, because what you're going to hear about in the budget process in the next few months, we started talking about 2 weeks ago in the fiscal forecast. So you should not expect to hear, oh, we're adding this or taking this away at any point through this process. What you're going to hear is more detail on what we're doing across those different departmental areas. And so our hope is for a rational, less emotional, less us against them and storm the castle kind of budget process, and more of really good, robust presentation and discussion, and us being very responsive to that feedback as we go along.
Okay, well, that concludes our Q&A session. We don't have any other questions planned here. I know we've gone a little bit long. It's a little after 8, but we can probably take
Yeah,
a
couple
handful of questions if anybody has them. We just ask that you go up to the mic so we can hear you and it can be recorded. Just so everybody knows, this recording will be made available. Where is that going to be posted?
It'll be on the website at some point.
It'll be on the website, so feel free to share it if you know people that wanted to join us tonight. So, okay.
First of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for the board members to coming here. Fourth grader daughter here, love homes, absolutely fantastic. Can you explain the calendar going forward? 10 half-days this year, 4 parent-teacher conference half-days, 3 in the spring. Is there a way to reduce that?
Yes.
It seems a little ridiculous.
Yes, it will be reduced.
So, okay.
So we've already been talking as an administrative team. There are a number of the days that were put in place because of the new literacy resource that was launching this year. That's not going to be necessary next year, but we're also, we started talking probably before the kids were even in school about the challenges that this year's calendar created for our families. This goes back to what I was saying as a parent that I dealt with. Those are really difficult for families to navigate, half-days, early dismissals, late starts, all those things. So yes, you will see a significantly different calendar going forward. So we'll be looking at all of those different components. But we do know that that whole bunch of days that was added for the professional learning piece, we're not going to need that in next year's calendar. So there will be a big change.
But even, the parent-teacher conferences, I mean, it seems a little ridiculous.
Yeah.
That there's 4 half-days.
We're going to
and
look
nothing at night.
We're going to look at all of it, and you'll definitely see some changes.
Okay,
there.
perfect. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any burning questions? All right. I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you all
coming.
for coming.